Sarah Martinez clutched her worn leather bag tighter as she walked through the gates of Riverside Military Academy for the first time. The autumn wind whipped through the courtyard, carrying the sharp commands of drill sergeants and the rhythmic sound of boots marching in formation. At 17, she was one of the youngest cadets to ever be accepted into the prestigious academy, but that wasn't what made her different from the others. The acceptance letter had arrived 3 months earlier, just 2 weeks after her father's funeral. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez had been killed in action overseas, leaving behind a Purple Heart, a folded flag, and a daughter with dreams bigger than her small hometown could contain. Sarah had applied to the academy in secret, knowing her mother would never approve. Military life had already taken too much from their family. As she approached the imposing brick dormitory building, Sarah noticed the stares. Her classmates whispered among themselves, their eyes following her every movement. She tried to ignore the comments about her height, her accent, and, most painfully, her family's financial situation. Her uniform was clearly second-hand, altered multiple times to fit her small frame. While other cadets arrived with expensive luggage and the latest gear, Sarah carried everything she owned in a single battered bag that had once belonged to her father. The dormitory assignment officer, a stern woman named Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, handed Sarah her room key with barely a glance. Room 247 was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway that echoed with the sounds of unpacking and nervous laughter. Sarah's roommate was already there when she arrived, a tall blonde girl named Jessica who came from a long line of military officers. Jessica looked up from her perfectly organized side of the room and smiled politely, but Sarah could see the judgment in her eyes as she took in Sarah's appearance. The conversation was awkward and brief. Jessica mentioned her father was a colonel, her brother was at West Point, and her family had been military for 4 generations. Sarah simply nodded and began unpacking her few belongings in silence. That first week was brutal. The physical training pushed every cadet to their limits, but Sarah found herself struggling more than most. She was smaller and less prepared than her classmates, many of whom had attended expensive preparatory schools with military programs. During morning runs, she fell behind. In the weight room, she could barely lift half of what the other cadets managed. Her drill instructor, Sergeant Morrison, seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out her weaknesses in front of the entire squad. But it was during weapons training that Sarah truly shined. When they moved to the firing range, something clicked. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. Shot after shot hit the center of the target with precision that impressed even the most seasoned instructors. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12, using tin cans lined up on fence posts behind their house. Those weekend lessons had been their special time together, and now they were her salvation. The other cadets began to notice. Some were impressed, others jealous. A small group, led by a cadet named Brandon Pierce whose father was a general, seemed particularly bothered by Sarah's shooting skills. Brandon was everything Sarah wasn't: tall, confident, wealthy, and connected. He had the kind of easy charm that came from never having to worry about money or fitting in. His friends hung on his every word, and together they formed an unofficial elite within their class. Brandon started making comments during meals, loud enough for others to hear but quiet enough to avoid getting in trouble with the instructors. He questioned how someone from Sarah's background could afford to be at the academy. He suggested that maybe she had received special treatment because of her father's death, that she was taking a spot that should have gone to someone more deserving. His words stung because they echoed Sarah's own deepest fears. The harassment escalated gradually. Sarah would find her gear moved or hidden. Her notes would disappear before important exams. Once, she discovered that someone had loosened the straps on her backpack, causing her books and supplies to spill across the courtyard during a formation exercise. The laughter from Brandon's group was like salt in an open wound. Sarah tried to report the incidents, but proving who was responsible was impossible. The instructors told her that dealing with difficult personalities was part of military training, that she needed to toughen up and handle her own problems. She began to feel increasingly isolated, questioning whether she truly belonged in this world of privilege and tradition. The breaking point came during a field training exercise 3 months into the semester. The cadets were divided into squads and given a navigation challenge that would test their teamwork and leadership skills. Sarah found herself assigned to Brandon's squad, along with Jessica and 2 other cadets who rarely spoke to her. The exercise required them to work together to find a series of checkpoints using only a map and compass. Brandon immediately took charge, dismissing Sarah's suggestions and assigning her the least important tasks. When she tried to point out that they were heading in the wrong direction, he cut her off sharply, reminding her that his family had been reading military maps since before she was born. The squad got lost, missed 2 checkpoints, and finished dead last in the exercise. During the debrief, Brandon blamed Sarah for the failure, claiming she had distracted the team with her constant questions and suggestions. The instructor, Lieutenant Rodriguez, listened carefully to both sides of the story. He had been watching the dynamics within the squad for weeks and had his own suspicions about what was really happening. That night, Sarah sat alone in her room while Jessica was at a study group she hadn't been invited to join. She pulled out a photograph of her father in his dress uniform, the same photo that had sat on their kitchen table for years. Tears blurred her vision as she wondered if she was dishonoring his memory by staying in a place where she clearly wasn't wanted. She opened her bag to pack, ready to call her mother and admit defeat. But, as her fingers brushed against the bottom of the bag, they encountered something unexpected. Hidden beneath a false bottom that she had never noticed before was a small metal object wrapped in cloth. With trembling hands, she unwrapped it to reveal a medal she had never seen before, along with a letter in her father's handwriting. The letter was dated just weeks before his final deployment. In it, he wrote about his pride in Sarah's determination to attend the academy, about his own struggles as a young soldier from a poor family, and about a promise he had made to himself to always protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He had hidden the medal, he explained, so that she would find it when she needed it most. The medal was a silver star, awarded to her father for gallantry in action years before she was born. She had never known about it because he never talked about his decorations. He had been too humble, too focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on past achievements. But, now, holding the medal in her hands, Sarah felt a connection to something larger than herself. She carefully rewrapped the medal and placed it back in its hiding spot. Tomorrow, she would face whatever challenges came her way, but tonight she felt her father's presence giving her strength. She didn't know that across campus, Brandon and his friends were planning something that would test that strength sooner than she expected. The next morning brought news of a surprise inspection. All cadets were required to present their personal belongings for review, including the contents of their bags and lockers. It was presented as a routine check for contraband or unauthorized items, but Sarah noticed the way Brandon smirked when the announcement was made. Something about his expression made her stomach twist with anxiety. As the inspection began, Sarah watched nervously as her classmates laid out their possessions with military precision. When her turn came, she carefully removed each item from her bag, her heart pounding as she thought about the hidden medal. The inspecting officer was someone she had never seen before, a captain with cold eyes and an expression that suggested he was looking for trouble. The captain examined each item methodically, asking questions about their purpose and origin. When he reached the bottom of the bag, his fingers probed the edges just as Sarah's had the night before. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized he had found the hidden compartment. The captain's fingers traced the edge of the hidden compartment with the expertise of someone who had conducted thousands of inspections. Sarah's mouth went dry as she watched him work, knowing that in seconds he would discover her father's medal. Around her, other cadets had finished their inspections and were beginning to gather, drawn by the unusual attention her bag was receiving. "What do we have here?" the captain muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. His voice carried across the dormitory common room, and Sarah could see Brandon pushing through the crowd to get a better view. There was an expression of satisfied anticipation on his face that made her stomach churn. The captain pulled out the wrapped medal and held it up for everyone to see. "Cadet Martinez, care to explain why you're concealing items in a hidden compartment?" His voice was stern, official, carrying the weight of military authority that could end her career before it had truly begun. Sarah's mind raced. She could tell the truth about finding the medal, but, without documentation or witnesses, it would sound like a fabricated story. She could claim ignorance about the compartment's existence, but that would make her appear careless with her equipment. Either way, she was facing serious disciplinary action for possessing undocumented military property. Brandon stepped forward from the crowd, his voice carrying false concern. "Captain, I hate to say this about a fellow cadet, but some of us have noticed that Martinez seems to have access to military equipment that the rest of us don't. We've wondered if she might be involved in some kind of unauthorized acquisition of military property." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Brandon was essentially accusing her of theft, of somehow stealing or illegally obtaining military decorations. The crowd of cadets murmured among themselves, and Sarah could see doubt creeping into their faces. She had worked so hard to prove herself, and now it all seemed to be crumbling around her. "That's not true," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found it in my bag. It belonged to my father." But, even as she said the words, she knew how weak they sounded. Without proof, without documentation, her claim seemed desperate and hollow. The captain unwrapped the medal completely, and his expression changed when he saw what he was holding. The silver star gleamed in the fluorescent lights of the dormitory, its distinctive design unmistakable to anyone with military experience. But, instead of clarification, this seemed to deepen the mystery. Silver stars weren't the kind of decorations that just appeared in random bags. "Cadet Martinez, this is a silver star. Are you claiming your father was awarded this decoration?" The captain's tone had shifted slightly, becoming more investigative than accusatory. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger. "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez. He was killed in action 3 months ago." She could see some of the cadets exchanging glances, their hostility beginning to mix with curiosity. Brandon, however, wasn't backing down. "Captain, with all due respect, anyone can claim a connection to a decorated soldier. We've all heard stories about people collecting military decorations that don't belong to them. Without proper documentation, how can we verify that this medal legitimately belonged to her father?" The captain nodded slowly. Brandon's point was valid from a regulatory standpoint, and Sarah realized that her tormentor had trapped her perfectly. Even if the medal was genuine, even if it had belonged to her father, she had no way to prove it. Military decorations were carefully tracked and documented, but personal possession of them after a soldier's death was a complex matter. "I'm going to need to confiscate this medal pending further investigation," the captain announced. "Cadet Martinez, you'll report to the commandant's office at 0800 tomorrow morning. This is a serious matter that requires proper review." As the captain wrapped the medal and placed it in an evidence bag, Sarah felt a piece of her father slipping away. The medal had been his, she was certain of that, but proving it seemed impossible. She had no access to his military records, no documentation of his decorations, no way to demonstrate that the medal in her bag was anything more than a clever fake or stolen property. The crowd began to disperse, but not before Sarah caught the satisfied expression on Brandon's face. He had succeeded in exposing her, in proving that she didn't belong at the academy. Whatever happened next, her reputation among her fellow cadets was permanently damaged. She would always be the girl who had tried to pass off someone else's medal as her father's. Jessica approached her as she finished repacking her bag with trembling hands. For a moment, Sarah thought her roommate might offer some words of support, but instead Jessica just looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, I hope this gets sorted out," she said quietly. "But you have to understand how this looks to the rest of us." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her room while Jessica attended a mandatory study session. The empty space where her father's medal had been felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. She tried to study for the next day's examinations, but concentration was impossible. Every few minutes, she would glance at her bag, remembering the weight of the silver star in her hands. Around midnight, there was a soft knock on her door. Sarah opened it to find Lieutenant Rodriguez, the instructor from the field exercise who had witnessed Brandon's treatment of her. He looked around carefully before speaking, making sure they wouldn't be overheard. "Cadet Martinez, I wanted to speak with you privately about what happened today," he said in a low voice. "I've been doing some thinking about the situation, and I have some questions." Sarah invited him in, grateful for any adult who seemed willing to listen to her side of the story. Lieutenant Rodriguez was younger than most of the instructors, probably in his early 30s, and he had a reputation for being fair but demanding with his students. "Tell me about your father," he said simply. "Not just his name and rank, but who he was as a person. What did he tell you about his service?" For the next hour, Sarah found herself sharing memories she had never spoken about with anyone. She told him about her father's humility, his reluctance to discuss his military decorations, his focus on helping others rather than promoting his own achievements. She described the weekend shooting lessons, the way he had taught her to respect both weapons and the responsibility that came with them. Lieutenant Rodriguez listened carefully, asking occasional questions that seemed designed to test the consistency of her story. He was particularly interested in the details about her father's reluctance to discuss his decorations, and about the way she had discovered the medal. "Cadet Martinez, I want you to understand something," he said finally. "What happened today was orchestrated. Cadet Pierce has been building up to this for weeks, looking for a way to discredit you. The timing of that inspection wasn't coincidental." Sarah felt a surge of anger mixed with vindication. She had suspected that Brandon was behind the inspection, but hearing it confirmed by an instructor made the betrayal feel even more personal. "The question now," Lieutenant Rodriguez continued, "is what you're going to do about it. You can let this defeat you, or you can find a way to prove who you really are. But I want you to know that some of us have been watching, and some of us believe in you." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Your father's service record is a matter of military documentation. If that medal belonged to him, there will be a record of it. The question is whether you're willing to fight to prove it." After he left, Sarah spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about his words. Fighting back would mean challenging Brandon directly, risking even more humiliation if she was wrong. But giving up would mean abandoning everything her father had taught her about standing up for what was right. The next morning, Sarah reported to the commandant's office as ordered. Colonel Patricia Hartwell was a formidable woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see through any deception. She had been commandant of the academy for 8 years and had a reputation for being absolutely fair but utterly uncompromising when it came to matters of honor and integrity. "Cadet Martinez, you're here because of a serious allegation regarding unauthorized possession of military decorations," Colonel Hartwell began. "Before we proceed, I want you to understand that this is not just about a single medal. This is about honesty, integrity, and your fitness to serve as a military officer." Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked directly into the colonel's eyes. "Ma'am, I understand the seriousness of the situation. The medal belonged to my father, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez. I discovered it hidden in a bag that had been his, and I had no knowledge of its existence until the night before the inspection." Colonel Hartwell made notes as Sarah spoke, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. She was particularly interested in the timing of the discovery and the circumstances surrounding the inspection. "Cadet Martinez, you're asking me to believe a very convenient story. You discover a valuable military decoration the night before an inspection that reveals its existence. You have no documentation, no witnesses, and no proof of your father's entitlement to the medal. From a disciplinary standpoint, this appears to be a clear case of unauthorized possession." Sarah felt her hopes beginning to crumble, but she forced herself to remain composed. "Ma'am, I understand how it appears. But I'm telling you the truth. My father never talked about his decorations because he was humble about his service. He focused on the future, not the past. I believe he hid the medal because he wanted me to find it when I needed it most." Colonel Hartwell studied Sarah's face for a long moment, as if trying to read her character through her expression. Finally, she picked up her phone and made a call that Sarah couldn't quite hear. The conversation was brief and professional, ending with the colonel saying, "Yes, I'll hold." "Cadet Martinez, I'm going to give you an opportunity to prove your story," Colonel Hartwell said after hanging up. "I've contacted the records department to verify your father's decorations. If Staff Sergeant Martinez was indeed awarded a Silver Star, and if the medal in question matches the description in his service record, then we'll proceed accordingly. If not, you'll be facing dismissal from the academy." The wait was agonizing. Sarah sat in the outer office for what felt like hours, watching other cadets report for various administrative matters. Some stared at her with curiosity, others with sympathy, and a few with barely concealed contempt. She tried to prepare herself for either outcome, knowing that her entire future hung in the balance. When Colonel Hartwell finally called her back into the office, Sarah could read nothing from her expression. The colonel held a folder that presumably contained the results of the records search, but she didn't open it immediately. "Cadet Martinez, before I share what I've learned, I want you to understand something about leadership and character. A true leader doesn't just follow rules, they understand the principles behind those rules. They don't just avoid doing wrong, they actively work to do right, even when it's difficult or unpopular." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to speak. Colonel Hartwell opened the folder and read for a moment before looking up. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez was indeed awarded the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. The citation describes his actions in protecting civilian refugees during an ambush, actions that saved 17 lives at considerable risk to his own. Relief flooded through Sarah, but Colonel Hartwell wasn't finished. "However, this doesn't automatically resolve your situation. Military decorations are sometimes lost, stolen, or replicated. We need to verify that the specific medal found in your possession is the one awarded to your father. That verification process will take several days." The verification process that Colonel Hartwell mentioned turned into the longest week of Sarah's life. During this time, she was placed on administrative suspension, meaning she could attend classes but couldn't participate in any official academy activities. The other cadets treated her like she was already guilty, their whispered conversations stopping whenever she entered a room. Brandon and his friends were particularly smug during this period. They made pointed comments about integrity and honor whenever Sarah was within earshot, always careful to stay just within the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Jessica, her roommate, had requested a room transfer, claiming she felt uncomfortable living with someone under investigation for honor code violations. Lieutenant Rodriguez was one of the few faculty members who continued to treat Sarah normally during this time. He made a point of greeting her in the hallways and including her in classroom discussions, small gestures that meant more to her than he probably realized. Other instructors seemed to be keeping their distance, waiting to see how the investigation would resolve before committing to any particular opinion. On Thursday of that week, something unexpected happened. Sarah was studying alone in the library when she was approached by a cadet she barely knew, a quiet student named Marcus Chen who rarely spoke in class. He sat down across from her and pulled out a notebook, pretending to study while he spoke in a low voice. "I need to tell you something about that inspection," Marcus said without looking up from his book. "I was working in the administrative office that day, filing reports for Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. I overheard Cadet Pierce talking to someone on the phone about timing and making sure certain people would be present." Sarah's heart began to race. "Are you saying Brandon arranged for the inspection?" "I can't prove anything," Marcus replied carefully. "But the timing was suspicious. Pierce seemed to know exactly when it would happen and which officers would be conducting it. He also made comments about finally exposing people who don't belong here." Before Sarah could ask more questions, Marcus gathered his books and left, but not before sliding a piece of paper across the table. On it, he had written the name and phone number of someone in the administrative office who might have more information. That evening, Sarah debated whether to pursue Marcus's lead. Getting other cadets involved could backfire if the investigation turned against her, but she also knew that proving Brandon's involvement might be her only chance at redemption. She decided to wait until the medal verification was complete before taking any action. The answer came on Friday afternoon. Colonel Hartwell called Sarah to her office and asked her to bring the bag where she had discovered the medal. When Sarah arrived, she found not only the colonel but also Captain James Morrison, the officer who had conducted the original inspection, and another man in dress uniform whose rank insignia indicated he was a senior officer from outside the academy. "Cadet Martinez, I'd like you to meet Colonel David Reyes from the Army's Awards and Decorations Branch," Colonel Hartwell began. "He's here because the verification process revealed some interesting information about your father's medal." Colonel Reyes stepped forward and shook Sarah's hand with a firm grip. He was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with graying hair and the kind of bearing that suggested extensive combat experience. His expression was serious but not unkind. "Miss Martinez, I knew your father," Colonel Reyes said simply. "I was a lieutenant in his unit when he performed the actions that earned him the Silver Star. I was also present when the medal was presented to him, and I can tell you that the citation doesn't begin to capture what he actually did that day." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she fought to maintain her composure. Hearing about her father from someone who had actually served with him was overwhelming in a way she hadn't expected. "The medal we recovered from your bag is authentic," Colonel Reyes continued. "More than that, it bears specific markings and characteristics that match the one presented to your father. There's no doubt that this is his medal." Relief flooded through Sarah, but she could see from the expressions around her that there was more to the story. "However," Colonel Reyes continued, "that raises another question. Your father's medal was never reported missing or stolen. According to our records, it should have been returned to his family along with his other personal effects. The fact that you found it hidden in a bag suggests that he took deliberate steps to conceal it." Sarah thought about her father's letter, about his words regarding finding the medal when she needed it most. "Sir, my father left me a letter with the medal. He wrote about wanting me to have it when I faced challenges that tested my resolve." Colonel Reyes nodded thoughtfully. "That would be consistent with the man I knew. Miguel Martinez was one of the most humble soldiers I ever served with. He never sought recognition for his actions, and he was always more concerned about others than himself." Captain Morrison, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. "Colonel Reyes, there's something else you should know about this situation. The inspection that led to the discovery of the medal wasn't routine. We have reason to believe it was specifically requested based on allegations made by another cadet." Colonel Reyes's expression hardened. "What kind of allegations?" "That Cadet Martinez was in unauthorized possession of military property, possibly obtained through illegal means," Captain Morrison replied. "The allegations were made by Cadet Pierce, who claimed that Martinez had access to equipment that other cadets didn't." "I see," Colonel Reyes said, his tone becoming noticeably cooler. "And what evidence did Cadet Pierce provide to support these allegations?" "None, sir," Captain Morrison admitted. "The allegations were based on suspicion and observation rather than concrete evidence." Colonel Hartwell looked at Sarah with an expression that had shifted from neutral to sympathetic. "Cadet Martinez, it appears that you've been the victim of a deliberate attempt to damage your reputation and standing at this academy. That's a serious matter that we'll need to address separately." Before anyone could respond, there was a knock on the door. Lieutenant Rodriguez entered and saluted the senior officers. "Ma'am, sirs, I apologize for the interruption, but there's something you need to know about this situation. I have a cadet outside who has information about the circumstances surrounding the inspection." Marcus Chan entered the office looking nervous but determined. In a clear voice, he repeated what he had told Sarah about overhearing Brandon's phone conversation, but this time he provided additional details about dates and times that could be verified. Colonel Reyes listened to Marcus's testimony with growing anger. When the young cadet finished speaking, the colonel stood and paced to the window, looking out at the academy grounds where hundreds of cadets were participating in afternoon training exercises. "In my 30 years of military service, I've seen many examples of both honor and dishonor," Colonel Reyes said finally. "What troubles me most about this situation isn't just the false allegations, but the underlying motivation. Cadet Pierce appears to have targeted Cadet Martinez based on her background and financial circumstances rather than her character or abilities." He turned back to face the group. "That kind of discrimination has no place in the military. We judge people by their actions, their integrity, and their commitment to service, not by their family's wealth or social status." Colonel Hartwell nodded in agreement. "Colonel Reyes, would you be willing to participate in a formal presentation of the medal to Cadet Martinez? Given the circumstances, I think it would be appropriate to have someone who served with her father present for the ceremony." "I would consider it an honor," Colonel Reyes replied. The formal presentation ceremony was scheduled for the following Monday, to be held in front of the entire academy. Sarah spent the weekend in a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The vindication felt wonderful, but she knew that the ceremony would also mark her as different from her classmates in ways that might never fully heal. Monday morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn weather that made the academy grounds look like a postcard. The entire cadet corps was assembled in formation on the main parade ground, their uniforms spotless and their bearing perfect. Sarah stood at attention with her company, trying to control her nervousness as she waited for her name to be called. Colonel Hartwell stepped to the podium and began by explaining the purpose of the ceremony. She spoke about honor, integrity, and the importance of supporting fellow cadets rather than tearing them down. Her words were measured and professional, but Sarah could hear an undertone of disappointment as she discussed the recent events. Today we gather not just to present a medal, but to reaffirm our commitment to the values that define us as military officers, Colonel Hartwell announced. We also gather to correct an injustice and to ensure that all cadets understand the standards of conduct expected at this academy. When Sarah's name was called, she marched to the front of the formation with precise steps that her father would have been proud of. As she approached the reviewing stand, she could see Colonel Reyes standing next to Colonel Hartwell, holding a small wooden box that contained her father's silver star. But it was what happened next that truly shocked everyone present, including Sarah herself. As she came to attention in front of the reviewing stand, Colonel Reyes stepped forward and did something that violated military protocol in the most beautiful way possible. Instead of simply presenting the medal, he rendered a crisp salute to Sarah, holding it for a full 3 seconds before speaking. Cadet Martinez, it is my honor to return to you the silver star that was awarded to your father, Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, for conspicuous gallantry in action, Colonel Reyes announced, his voice carrying across the silent parade ground. Your father was a hero who saved 17 civilian lives while under enemy fire. He was also a man of incredible humility who believed that true service meant lifting others up, not tearing them down. The colonel opened the wooden box and removed the silver star, its ribbon bright against the autumn sky. This medal represents not just your father's courage, but the values he lived by and the legacy he left for you to carry forward. Wear it with pride, knowing that you have already demonstrated the same strength of character that made him a hero. As Colonel Reyes pinned the medal to Sarah's uniform jacket, she felt her father's presence more strongly than she had since his death. The weight of the medal seemed to connect her to something larger than herself, to a tradition of service and sacrifice that transcended social class or family wealth. But the most powerful moment came when Colonel Reyes stepped back and saluted her again, this time joined by Colonel Hartwell and every officer on the reviewing stand. The salute wasn't for Sarah personally, but for what she represented, the continuation of her father's legacy and the triumph of character over prejudice. The gesture sent ripples through the assembled cadets. One by one, starting with Lieutenant Rodriguez and spreading through the ranks, the entire cadet corps came to attention and rendered the same salute. Even Brandon Pierce, standing in formation with his company, was forced to participate in honoring the girl he had tried so hard to destroy. When the ceremony concluded and the formations began to disperse, Sarah found herself surrounded by classmates who had barely spoken to her before. Some offered congratulations, others simply nodded with newfound respect, and a few admitted that they had been wrong about her. Jessica approached her as she was leaving the parade ground, looking embarrassed and uncertain. Sarah, I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I should have supported you instead of assuming the worst. I'd like to move back into our room if you'll have me. Sarah considered the offer for a moment before nodding. Everyone makes mistakes, Jessica. What matters is learning from them. Marcus Chen also approached, grinning widely. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen, he said enthusiastically. When Colonel Reyes saluted you, I thought the whole academy was going to explode. Nobody's ever seen anything like that before. As Sarah walked back to her dormitory, she noticed that several cadets stepped aside respectfully as she passed. The whispered conversations had a different tone now, focused on admiration rather than suspicion. She had gone from being an outsider to being someone whose story would be told for years to come. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when she passed Brandon Pierce in the hallway. He looked at her with an expression that mixed anger, embarrassment, and grudging respect. For the first time since she had arrived at the academy, Sarah met his gaze directly and held it until he looked away. That evening, Sarah sat in her room carefully placing her father's silver star in a place of honor on her desk. The metal caught the light from her reading lamp, its 5 points seeming to sparkle with their own inner fire. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, about the challenges she had faced and overcome. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Colonel Reyes standing in the hallway, now dressed in casual civilian clothes rather than his formal uniform. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion," he said with a smile. "I wanted to speak with you privately before I return to my duty station." Sarah invited him in, still somewhat awed by the presence of someone who had known her father personally. "I want to tell you more about your father," Colonel Reyes said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "The official citation for his Silver Star mentions that he saved 17 civilian lives, but it doesn't tell you how he did it or what it cost him." For the next hour, Colonel Reyes shared stories about Miguel Martinez that Sarah had never heard before. He told her about her father's courage under fire, his dedication to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right regardless of the personal cost. "Your father was wounded that day," Colonel Reyes revealed. "He took shrapnel in his leg and shoulder while evacuating the civilians, but he refused medical attention until everyone was safe. Even then, he tried to go back to help with the cleanup and casualty collection." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she listened to these stories about her father's heroism. She had always known he was a good man, but hearing about his actions from someone who had witnessed them gave her a deeper understanding of who he had been. "There's something else you should know," Colonel Reyes continued. "Your father talked about you constantly. He carried your picture with him everywhere, and he used to read your letters to anyone who would listen. He was so proud of your determination to attend this academy, and he believed you had the strength to overcome any obstacle." The colonel stood to leave, then paused at the door. "What happened here this week isn't just about you, Sarah. It's about the kind of military we want to be, the kind of leaders we want to produce. You've shown that character matters more than connections, that integrity trumps privilege every time." After he left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts and her father's medal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and new chances to live up to the legacy he had left her. But tonight, she felt ready for whatever came next. The silver star on her desk caught the light one more time as she prepared for bed, its 5 points seeming to wink at her like a promise that her father's spirit would always be watching over her, guiding her through whatever battles lay ahead.